Thank you, guys. It seems that all the seats are taken, so we can slowly carry on. So, as I was saying, the goal of this event is not only to educate, but also to inspire. That's why we are very happy to announce someone whose projects we've been following in awe for the past several years. He actually graduated from the Belgrade University of Arts in the Department of Interior and Furniture Design, of all things, in 2012. And having developed a strong passion for film and animation, he decided to take on this career path and focus on all things motion picture. He has a strong belief in devoting time to personal projects, has received several awards, I would say many, not several, and recognitions from the CG industry, and has also given back to the industry by publishing some of his insights and behind-the-scenes processes from his personal projects. Now, in late 2017, he started his directing career at Hydra Studios, which is pretty impressive. And he continues the collaboration with Glasgow-based studio. He works on AAA game cinematics, as well as never-ending development of personal IPs. Good luck with that to him. And please give a huge round of applause for Sava Živković. Oh! Good luck.
Hello, is this working? Yeah. All right, so thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Thank you for the warm welcome and for the lovely introduction. I'm a little bit blushed, but I know we have very limited time today, so I'm just going to dive right into CGI filmmaking, basically. Let me just see how the laptop works. So yes, my name is Sava Živković. I'm a director. I'm based here in Belgrade, but I work remotely with two UK-based studios, Hydra Studios and Hydra Studios. But recently, just as a brief update and a teaser, I've been making some local friends as well. And we're working on something really interesting, a AAA title. So any 3D artists out there, feel free to check out what's happening at Medhead Games. There's plenty of interesting opportunities to be had there. I'll just continue on. So just as a brief kind of background, for my day work, for client stuff, basically what I do is I direct AAA game cinematics, game trailers, stuff like that. And then during night and in my free time, I create my own personal animated short films. And this is kind of how I learned a bit about CG, a bit about animation. This is how I learned filmmaking, how I learned directing. And every time I've done one of these, I've always kind of experimented with different kind of tools, different techniques, different approaches to storytelling, to filmmaking. And in exploring different tools, this eventually led me to trying out Unreal Engine, and that's kind of how I made Irradiation last year, which is one of the latest animated shorts that I've done. But we're going to circle our way back to Irradiation, and I'm going to first talk about kind of how I got to trying out Unreal Engine in the first place. And that has specifically to do with my journey with Previs. And more importantly, it has to do with kind of what I call the cinematography problem with CG animation. So first things first, what the fuck's Previs, right? So I mean, it's a fairly self-explanatory name. It stands for pre-visualization. Let me see if I can play this. I knew something's not gonna work. All right, okay, thank you. So this is one example. So Previs is basically, in the most simplest of terms, it's basically a 3D equivalent of a sketch. It's very, very basic placeholder geometry that's very rough and ugly and rough and ready, but the point of it is to do it fast so you can have an idea of your shot and you can have an idea of a sequence and how many shots you're gonna have, and then that helps with the production because now you know what you're gonna make, basically. So I'll play another example, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. So, production-wise, Previs is really important. It's incredibly important for the whole kind of animation pipeline. But specifically from like the directing and from the cinematography perspective of things, Previs, in my opinion, is really where you get to make your film. So if your editing and pacing works in this very rough form in the Previs with sound and music and everything, it's only going to work 10 times better once you have everything made and modeled and rendered out and it's all looking kind of nice. the big problem with that is previs is very ugly. It's very uninspiring to look at. And there's a big problem in terms of cinematography specifically. Cinematography is one of my favorite aspects of filmmaking. And one of the biggest problems is you're creating all of your shots in the previs, but there's a complete absence of light. And cinematography without light absolutely doesn't exist. So when you kind of compare kind of how the general overview of an animation pipeline looks like, it's kind of like this. You know, you start with the previs, then you model, texture, rig, animate everything, and then you get into lighting. So when you look at it from this perspective, you know, your main camera work, where you're setting up all of your shots and all of your composition choices, happens like in the first 2 weeks of the project. And then there's like a gap of like 5 months before you actually get to light those shots, because that's just how the pipeline works. And again, like that's something that was bothering me after kind of years of doing this. You know, you compare this to a live action experience where, sure, there's a lot of work that goes into lighting of live action sets, but once it's made, you can, you know, be a little bit more explorative. You can move the camera around. You can find some things that you weren't planning for because it's just there, you know. You can just move the camera and things kind of, there's happy accidents. There's kind of the more kind of opportunistic and explorative process to cinematography. And animation was always suffering from that. And I really started to dislike that, and I wanted to kind of try to find a way to bring a little bit of that process in my kind of animation work. So this experience of working on the IFCC film, I was using Octane Render at the time, and Octane Render, this is a sped up footage, but it's very similar to this. You get this like really nice interactive viewport where you kind of actually get to see everything in context with the lights. And this was after the fact, like after everything was done, but just this experience of like flying around and finding different shots and like finding ideas that you didn't think of before because now you see them lit was absolutely mind-blowing for me. And I wanted to kind of try to tap into that a little bit more. So one of the next kind of test projects that I've done, like an experimental thing, I did this short that was kind of based on architecture. And for this one, I didn't do any previs at all. All I did was I made all of the environments, and then I flew around in Octane, and that's basically how I made all the shots and how I found all of the compositions. I found them directly by walking around the lit environment, and then that influenced like the composition choices. And that was amazing and great, but it's simple to do when your subject is architecture and when it's not moving. But when you have, you know, moving characters and effects and all the stuff that we do for work, it gets a little bit more complex. So I had to kind of take a step back and do something a little bit more simpler. So this is an example from a previs for my short film Freight. Yes, that is actually my email, but please don't look at that. Look at the ugly looking previs instead. So this is all 3ds Max viewport. And this is all real time in 3ds Max. And it's still ugly. It's still very ugly looking. There's no two questions about it. But at least there's something going on. There's a little bit of lighting information, there's a little bit of haze, a little bit of texture, just enough to kind of help you with the composition choices a little bit. So from that point onwards, I kind of figured out there's a way to actually hack 3ds Max's viewport. So this is still a viewport inside 3ds Max. This is a previs for like a Gears of War trailer I've done years ago that never made it in the final trailer, by the way. But this was definitely getting closer. This is kind of having a little bit of that reflections and a little bit of nicer viewport kind of rendering quality, so you can actually have some, you know, more information and context when you're framing up your shots. And then finally, I bit the bullet and I decided to learn Blender. And Blender is absolutely fantastic. Like that's my go-to previs tool even for today. So this is another like project that never got made. And this is all previs geometry, so this is all kind of very low poly. But the experience that you get here, like everything is lit, everything is rendered. You have like really nice looking volumetric lights, you have really nice looking shadows, you have depth of field, motion blur. Let me just scrub through a little bit. But you know, it's an amazing experience. I absolutely love Blender. And for previous purposes, I'll show you a practical example. This is a trailer I've directed at Access last year for Diablo Immortal. So upper left is the previs, bottom right is the final picture. And you can see, you know, the assets vary, but all of the shot choices, all of the, even like the lighting stuff that I was able to do in the previous stage kind of ended up in the final thing. And mind you, this is the stuff that we did like in the first week of the project. So having that creative control to actually be framing previs with some lighting information that actually looks kind of nice is absolutely fantastic. Like, it's exactly kind of what I wanted to have in like the first week of the project, basically, so you don't have to wait and imagine what's going to come 6 months down the line. So that was great. That was taking care of one of my needs to kind of have that experience in the previous stage. But still, there was this other problem, and it was more to do with kind of the general approach to kind of how CG animation is made. And it's something that bothered me on a much more deeper level. It's kind of the slow process, iterative process of animation where you're constantly recreating the same thing. Like, you create your storyboard animatic edit, and then you recreate the same edit with previs, and then you recreate the same edit with layout, and then you recreate again the same edit with animation, and then you recreate it again with lighting and rendering and whatnot. So it's like establishing something early on, and then like throughout the process of 6 months, you're just creating the same thing over and over again. And I felt that process to be, after a while, to be a little bit stale. And I wanted to try a process that's going to be a little bit different, that's going to be a little bit more explorative, something similar to a live action shoot where you have a plan, but you don't have like a specific plan in the previs and in the edit that you're just going to recreate in the end. Something that's a little bit more opportunistic in how you approach shooting and editing. And that's kind of finally how I actually, got in love with Unreal Engine, basically. So taking into account everything that I've said, so far, this is how that whole experience looks like in Unreal Engine. So in Unreal Engine, everything is right there in front of you, playing in complete real time, and you're seeing everything. You're seeing textures, reflections, shadows. You're seeing light in all of its glory, and it bounces off of complex animations and surfaces and materials. And it's this very experience of having this real-time stuff that fills you with ideas that you wouldn't normally have if you were just working in your regular 3D software of choice. Like, for example, you might see a shadow, and then that shadow might have an interesting kind of influence on your composition. Or you might see a reflection of your character, and maybe showing the character through that reflection actually has a deeper meaning for the story. But try finding that same reflection in your regular 3D software of choice. It's kind of a different thing. So going back to how the pipeline works, in order to actually have this experience, this more kind of explorative experience, I needed to change the pipeline a little bit. So basically what I did is I got rid of the previs entirely. There's no previs for irradiation. Modeling, texturing, rigging, and animation is done first, and then once everything is done and assembled in Unreal Engine, that's when camera work and lighting become best pals, and they work together in tandem, in unison, like they should, and like they are working in live action, basically. And that's what allows you to have that explorative process of finding things that you just didn't plan for before. And that's really, one of the best experiences that I've ever had, even to this day. So another great advantage of working with Unreal in animation is the influence on the motion capture process. So basically, with the motion capture, it's kind of similar experience with the previs. Like, your actors will kind of, like, they'll see previews of their characters, but they'll see the previews in, like, basic placeholder, like 3D grayscale models. But if you have Unreal Engine on the stage, they can actually see themselves like fully lit, fully rendered, inside an environment. They can see what the design of the character is. They can see how that design might actually influence or restrict their performances. And whether through the projector they have at Take One, or the TV screen, or the virtual camera, they can actually see the environment they're in. They can see as bare bones as this environment was, there's still an environment, and it just brings so much more context to the actors, and it allows them to basically, it allows you to start conversations that normally wouldn't happen, because they can actually see the world they're going to be portraying in, and I think that's extremely valuable for the whole process. And then the other thing is, again, like as mentioned, the virtual camera. So basically with the virtual camera, with typical motion capture, how it's shot, because you shoot the whole performance at once, you don't really look at the performance in the context of the shot. You're kind of looking at the full body. And if you compare that again to live action, when you're shooting live action, you have a monitor, and you're always looking at the performance from the context of the shot. So now having a virtual camera on the stage, you can actually frame up, a close-up, a medium close-up, And you can only focus on the performance from that angle. You're not going to worry about the rest of the body because that's not going to end up in the final shot. So that's another like extreme advantage of having the software on stage while actually shooting. And then once you've shot everything, that's when all the fun begins, and that's kind of how it looks like. So you kind of bring everything into Unreal. This is the very start of the performance with the character getting in place. And then everything is just there in front of you in real time. And this is an equivalent of arriving on location or arriving on a set with your DP, and now you're just kind of starting to have conversations of how are you going to shoot this, how are you going to cover this. And it's this infinitely loopable and replayable animation like a video file, but it's fully 3D. And you have all the advantages of CGI where you can change the lighting, change the effects, change whatever you want. You can change the characters if you want, as long as the rigs are the same. So this is where you get, again, to make all the creative decisions. Now, that being said, even though I wanted this to be an explorative process, I still went in with a plan, not a super detailed plan, but I had a shot list of kind of how I initially saw that I'm going to shoot the sequence. But still, I only used that as a blueprint and as a rough guide. I wasn't being, super strict about it. And I think that, like, allowing that sense of exploration is where some of the most interesting kind of creative choices with irradiation happened. Most interestingly, like some of the stuff that I never really planned for, but saw when I was actually in the engine, influenced the final output and the final quality of the film, I believe. So that's, as a whole experience, it's absolutely mind-blowing. And then, just looking forward a little bit into how the actual experience of working in Unreal is, you just fly around, you find a shot that just kind of looks and clicks with your shot idea. You can animate the camera in real time because you don't have to wait for play blasts, which is amazing. And then it's just right there, it just plays. You might have liked this because of lighting, but then it's very easy to change the lighting if you want to. You just select the sun, you can rotate it around, change the intensity of it if you want. You can add a soft top light, you can add a rim light, but maybe that's too strong. You can kind of reduce the intensity, move it around. And all of these things are very standard issue stuff that we do in CG animation every single day. But this experience in offline render methods is like, days upon days and even weeks. And in Unreal, it's just happening right in front of you at the speed of thought, basically. And it's completely, once you try it, there's kind of no going back really after it. And then furthermore, like, you can just go back to the shot perspective. You can sculpt the environment and change the whole landscape. You can paint forests with a couple of clicks, move mountains to create a little bit of a more pleasing leading lines to the composition. And again, still very standard stuff in terms of what we do in animation every day, but being able to do this in complete real time right in front of you is just something that hasn't been possible even just a couple of years ago, and it's completely changed the way I think about animation and production in general. So just as a kind of the closing thoughts and the future of filmmaking, as it's been called plenty of times thus far, with Unreal Engine, if I dilute this whole experience of creating irradiation, some of the efficiencies that the engine brought to the table are, the environment creation, environment scene assembly, camera animation, lighting and rendering is something that you can do kind of by yourself. Like, it used to require large teams of people, but with all the resources out there, this is really now something that you can do just by yourself. So that's expedited the process significantly. But then the animation side of things is something that still is taking quite a bit of time, and deservedly so. But if we were able to actually have perfect motion capture data, we would actually be able to shoot the animation side of things exactly the same way as we're shooting live action. We'd be able to shoot it on a shot-by-shot basis, not like an entire take, but literally shoot it on a shot-by-shot basis with a virtual camera that will render immediately everything as final. You just dump it on a hard drive at the end of the day, and you just start editing the film the next day. And that's a prospect I'm really, really excited for. I believe it's coming sooner rather than later, and I'm all here for it. And just as a last quick thing, with this whole democratization of Unreal Engine, the playing field has been leveled, and the barrier to entry to animation has never been lower, and you can really learn filmmaking at your own pace now. That's kind of something that speaks to me personally, because I've learned filmmaking at my own pace, just not with real-time technology, with offline, slow rendering stuff. But now this stuff expedites the whole process so much more, and it brings, faster progress, basically. If you ever wanted to learn filmmaking and animation, like, now is the time. This is something that's never been possible before. But with this whole democratization of the process, and with all of the asset libraries available online, and with when everyone has access to the same thing, this kind of poses the question of, there's going to be a lot of similar things out there. So how do you kind of differentiate yourself from everyone else? And that always comes back to the creative side of things. It always comes back to, if you're specifically pursuing filmmaking, it comes back to the foundations and what kind of a filmmaker you want to be. And in that sense, technology is amazing, and what Unreal Engine has done is absolutely fantastic. But at the end of the day, it is a tool. It's an amazing tool, but it is a tool. And no matter how fast rendering becomes, or no matter how fast the entire process becomes, learning the language of filmmaking, and more importantly, developing your own style and your craft, there's no shortcut for that, really, and at least not yet. And that stuff still takes years and years and years to kind of, learn. So if that's going to be any, if you're going to take one takeaway from this, is that tools are immensely important, and they make life a lot easier. But if you invest in your craft, that's actually kind of what matters at the end of the day. And with that, I'll stop rambling. Thank you so much for the time. 18 seconds. Thank you.